everyone. I'm Karyn Foley here at the Calabasas Library, and I'm doing this show thanks to all of you. The library, the city of Calabasas, media operations in particular, and the audience who stayed with us, the people who support our library, the Friends of the library programs, and our city council who supports us. In particular, James Bozajian, who's my co-host for today, is our 100th interview. So thank all of you for making this journey with us and having it become a successful program. Thanks to all of you. Our first thought is, how did
Authors Night begin?
Well, you had asked me once before, and I've been really thinking, I can't remember exactly how, when, where, but when we started getting the physical library as opposed to our bookmobile, I wanted to introduce the library and the importance and thank the citizens for voting for cityhood, because one of the benefits of the cityhood was a library right here in the city. From the bookmobile to a brick and mortar, eventually to getting a grant to building this library. And I wanted to make sure the public knew how important the library was to the quality of life and to community, which became Calabasas when we achieved cityhood. So I thought, let's have local authors who live in or right on our boundaries of Calabasas come speak to us about their books.
Now, one of the people you had on your show many years ago was Al Martinez, a noted columnist. What was he like?
He was the bard of this area, the bard of Calabasas, of the Santa Monica Mountains. I wrote to him often, and he ignored me. I finally either got a phone number or a direct email and said, why won't you, this is my last shot, I keep asking you, we would be honored to have you. He says, well, you're on the city council, Karyn, I don't like politicians, hate politicians. I said, fine, that's a fair comment. Come, meet me. If you don't like me or the audience that I'm getting for you, because I will publicize you everywhere, then you can walk away and you'll never hear from me again. So he came and he stayed. We had a wonderful audience of almost 100 people.
What did he write about?
Calabasas, the Santa Monica Mountains, what it's like to live here. And he came back a second time. He was so happy with the way he was received by the public when we had it televised. And for his second interview, he did about his writings, his experiences with the paper, and all that he contributed. Do you see yourself not only as a writer, but as a writer who keeps a moral tab on America?
Well, yeah, as an essayist, I do that. I do it in my column for the paper. I do it in magazine pieces that I freelance or that I am assigned. I do it in my blog, which I started about a year or so ago. Yeah, that's part of what I do. I keep tabs on the morality of America through observation, through direct contact, through the vast experiences I've had.
We publicized his his Saturday workshops. And I know Arlene Bernholtz from the Historical Society, and I attended these workshops. People from all over the area came not only to hear him, to know him, to meet his family, but to learn how to write and where to direct our writings to.
Well, you know, one of the things that I think sets apart your show from others is the local angle, where you feature authors who either live in Calabasas, work in Calabasas, have some connection to the local area. I don't think I've seen other shows quite like it. Would you agree that that kind of makes it a unique?
Absolutely. We wanted it to be something that would attract the audience, not only what they could learn from the people, their individual talents, but to feel a greater connection to our environs.
Now, speaking of local, one of your guests, Dr. Arnold Bresky, who had lived in Calabasas and was a local doctor and was very much into nutrition, physical fitness. He actually owned the land, operated a business on the land for a while, which became Calabasas Creekside Park when the city bought it.
Arnold was a wonderful contributor to Calabasas. Not only did he support the cityhood effort, but from the moment we became a city, he jumped in and was a great influence with the senior community here. He had, I still have a shirt that showed you how long I keep t-shirts.
Oh, the Calabasas Walkers?
Calabasas
Yeah,
Walkers.
I remember
we used
those.
to walk every weekend. And he also helped with getting people to lead a better lifestyle. And he's writing a book about it called Healthy Cooking Handbook for Rookies.
And so the people watching us now on television want brain health. That is the greatest motivator in the world, because without brain health, what good is all the material things? We don't have anything if we don't have brain health. And so we need to follow this diet every day. See, the problem is you can't eat the Mediterranean diet one day. You have to eat it all the time.
It's easy steps for the single person, or especially for seniors also, to do easy cooking that's healthy cooking as well.
Karyn, tell us about Yvette Garfield.
Oh, you remember her. She's one of the youngest and really a wonderful girl. She and her mom lived in Calabasas when I interviewed her. Now I think she's living elsewhere. She's not telling me. And she went straight from law school to a philanthropic yet professional endeavor by writing books, handstand for cooking classes for children.
I definitely have more of a background in eating rather than cooking. And I've traveled a bit, so I've been fortunate enough to taste and been exposed to a lot of different kinds of food.
Where have you traveled?
I've traveled to India, and that's sort of where I came up with the idea. Been to South America and a lot of Asia. And whenever I would travel, my little cousins, who were ages 3 to 12 at the time, would always inquire about the food as if I had been to Mars. So when I was in India on the way back, I had thought about how great it would have been if there was a cookbook that introduced them to the food as well as the culture.
Travel the world, one recipe at a time. For being such a young, talented person, she also was a very philanthropic person. She introduced kid chefs to the culinary cuisine and language of various countries all around the world. I would buy boxes, like the Italian box for Italian recipe, included a little hat, and it included something about the country, and it had the chef hat, the lessons, and she also did parties for children. And today, when I spoke to her, she's still heavily involved in that effort. She's expanded her company, the Handstand Kids, and she calls it the Handstand Kitchen. And she offers a lifestyle brand beyond children's products like utensils, aprons, textiles for the entire family, and does a gift line. Creative, philanthropic, talented, and young and generous. She also does consulting on other book series, as well as for Kroger's, who owns the Ralph Market, a junior chef program, and the Shopkins cookbook. So she's still doing the job, doing the work that she loved more than the law school that she attended.
Now, I know you've had a number of celebrities and well-known and/or well-known public figures appear on your show, one of whom was my former boss at the district attorney's office, Gil Garcetti. He's appeared on a couple of your shows, or a few of your shows.
3, I believe.
Former district attorney of LA County from 1992 to 2000. He always introduces himself by saying, I am an author who happened to have been district attorney at one time. And he is now published a few books.
When my first book came out, I was teaching at the Kennedy School at Harvard. I was teaching a seminar entitled The Interaction of the Criminal Justice System, Race, Politics, and the Media. And I heard that the LA Times was going to write a review of it. And I said, I said something nasty because the LA Times didn't care for me as a district attorney.
Well, then you should say something then.
That's right.
Oh, okay, good.
Well, they went 180 degrees. They loved me as a photographer. Then the New York Times picked up the story and interviewed me, and they wrote a story. And that was really the change, when I knew a change had been made, because it was on that occasion that about 2 weeks after, I received a phone call from a woman who says, I teach here at Harvard. I'm a professor of art. And I said, yes, I want you to come and teach one of my classes.
One of the rare people in life who has had a second chance and has evolved it into a second well-known, respected career is almost a photojournalist. His books are phenomenal. He did this first book that he did for us right after he became a journalist, after he ended his district attorney career, was Water is King. How we take water for granted here. We turn on the faucet, turn on the tap, we get water. But how in other countries like Africa, it's a commodity that isn't available for everyone. His second was Dance in Cuba, the way music plays such an important role in the Cuban lifestyle. Erecting the Walt Disney Concert Hall.
Right. He took for that book, he took pictures at various stages of the construction of the hall.
Fascinating. If you've ever been to Disney Hall, that book explains the whole process step by step. You're right. Then the book I love the best because of Paris is Paris, Women and Bicycles.
Yes.
And his generous spirit, we also had an art exhibit. And he had his pictures from that book, Paris and Women and Bicycles, and he kept it here as a gift to our library for several months.
He's come
It
here
was
many
on
times.
exhibition.
Yes.
And he also did a program for the seniors, exhibitions, Japan, Reverence for Beauty. Today he does 3 exhibitions, free exhibitions. Sometimes I don't. No, let's ignore that. Today, his exhibitions can be seen at the LA Science Center in San Francisco, in Delft, Holland, a UNESCO, and he consults on TV shows, and on TV shows on major crimes, and he's working on his first still life photo project. And the big plus in his life is now his son,
Yes.
who is mayor of Los Angeles.
Our neighboring city. Not quite as prominent as the mayor of Calabasas.
No.
But nonetheless, we must acknowledge him.
Nonetheless important. His joy in not only having a son like that is he can watch it and fell and say, that's my son, the mayor of Los Angeles.
Well, let's turn to Gregg Hurwitz. I know you've talked about him many times. Tell me about him and his books.
He does crime novels, very much located usually in and around the Calabasas and local environment. His research is unparalleled in many books, in most of the books that I read, period.
One of the things that I learned very early on that was absolutely essential to the research process is that I have to go on site to see this stuff and talk to the people who argue the cases, who dissect the bodies, who set the charges. And if I can't go on site, and if I'm doing this all based on Google, I can't write it in a way that really brings the reader there. And I learned this, in a very unusual way. I was on the phone for one of my early books with one of my consultants who was a Navy SEAL. And he was trying to explain to me how a certain detonation device worked. And finally, frustrated with my lack of comprehension and retention, he said, "I'm coming over," which is not the threat that one wants to hear from an agitated Navy SEAL. But nonetheless, he came over, he hid me in the back of his truck, he took me on a demolition range, and he blew up a truck. And then he promptly pointed at the aftermath and said, "Like that, dipshit." And of course, it was so clear to me, like seeing it up close and knowing how it works and being able to witness it and use my own means of describing it as a layperson experiencing it, it was totally different. And so I started to do really involved different research. Like I went undercover into a mind control cult.
He does extensive research. He's an intellectual writer. It's crime novel, but with a brain. And he was very generous, and he introduced me to the fact that most successful authors that I have met in this program are very kind in referring other authors to me. So many of my authors have come
Right.
by way of Gregg Hurwitz. He also writes comic books. And multi-talented. His books are spellbinding and intelligent. And I could never have a program of this without thanking him personally for all that he's done for me and for this program. And when I find out what he's been doing recently, it was that he had been on a 9-country tour promoting his new thriller book, The Orphan and the Nowhere Man. And he was on the bestseller list for many years in Germany. And he's been writing screenplays, and his first original screenplay was The Book of Henry, and it came out in June 2017, starring Naomi Watts, Jacob Tremblay, and Margie Ziegler. And I saw it at our local AMC in Woodland Hills. And he's also a very, very kind man and a good family man. And he has given us programs here in the library, as well as for me individually for Author Night series.
So tell me about Laurie Stevens. You had her on the show as well.
Many times. She's another very local author that is extremely successful.
As I continue with this series and I'm writing villains, the adversaries, a worthy adversary is going to have to be a very smart person to outfox the cops, because the cops have a lot of science at their disposal now. That means that that person is going to have to be, and of course the writer that's going to create that person has to sort of figure out how can this villain outfox the police investigators, because the police investigators have a lot of ammunition on their side now, which is nice. I mean, in real life, it's a good thing.
The other authors that I don't get from Gregg Hurwitz, I've gotten from Laurie Stevens. If I've ever stuck or anybody stuck for a program, Laurie will always help you out. And it turns out she's become like family. If I were to pick a citizen who doesn't live here, who I only know peripherally, that I could think of as family that I could call on for anything, it would be Laurie Stevens, a young woman of beauty, intelligence, generosity. And it turns out I knew, and my sister knew, her mother and 2 aunts that she has from Los Angeles High School.
Oh, boy.
They went to high school with my sister and me in the 1950s, if I can date us so. And we knew all 3 of them. My sister and I knew the 3 of them. And to find out that Laurie, plus she knew the husband of a girl I went all through school with, elementary, middle, and high school with. So I see her often. I support all of her endeavors. And her books, I'm glad to see she's still with us writing and becomes more and more successful as the year goes on. She also has published other authors' books to help their dream come true. When she has success, she wants others to be successful too. Very charitable also. She sets a very high level of professionalism for authors. To me, I think of Laurie as the Carolyn Keene of my youth. Carolyn King was known as the author who wrote the Nancy Drew mystery stories. Everyone read the Nancy Drew mystery stories. Everyone loved them. Everyone followed the characters. And you find that you're doing the same thing when you read one of Laurie Stevens' books and in some of her series.
Now, one of the authors with a very compelling story who lived here for many years in Calabasas with his wife was Werner Frank. Tell us about what he wrote about in his story.
Werner was one of the authors that I've had who wrote about the Holocaust. That subject can never be written about too often because the survivors of the Holocaust are fewer and fewer each year and could get forgotten.
When I started this book, I made an outline which never changed. And I wanted to include the entire family in the book. So even though out of the 30 or so chapters, most are mine, I did ask my wife to write a chapter. I asked my sister to write a chapter. And then I have one chapter where every one of our 3 children and 5 granddaughters at the time, we now have 2 little boys who couldn't write at the time that I wrote the book, but those 8 individuals all contributed to give me and themselves a place in the book as a memory.
Going back just one step, before Werner, I interviewed Dr. Aaron Haas, that not only once had an audience before we did our TV programs, a very well-filled audience of about 100 because of his reputation of working with children from the Holocaust and families and survivors.
It is so difficult for people to apologize. It's an amazing phenomenon to me. Think about it. Even when people say, gee, I'm sorry, what do they immediately follow it with? They follow it with an excuse for their behavior. I'm sorry I didn't pay attention to you yesterday, but I was preoccupied. Or I'm sorry I seemed rude yesterday, but I had a lot on my mind. Or apologies are so much more powerful if you simply say, I'm sorry, what I did was wrong, period. Without any excuses, without any buts. If you think about it, even in your close relationships, when your partner has said to you, honey, I'm sorry I did that yesterday, I was wrong. It's amazing how quickly our resentment dissipates.
He was one of several writers who wrote about the Holocaust, one of our first.
Well, Werner Frank, actually, as I understand it, was a survivor himself.
He was a survivor.
He must have been a child at the time. You were telling me about his story.
Werner Frank wrote the book, A Saga of a German Jewish Family Across Time and Circumstance.
And that was his story, right?
And it's his story. A family experience that family went through in a rural area in southwest Germany. He was once asked by a German citizen if he could forgive them. And we ended our session when I asked Werner, what did he say? Werner said, what could I say? It wasn't up to Werner to forgive him. And that was not his last book. The last time I spoke to Werner was a few weeks ago, and he has moved. You said he sold his house to a staff member
of the city
turns
of Calabasas.
out, of the city of Calabasas, and he and his wife Phoebe, who I also interviewed, who wrote a book of short stories, Phoebe and Werner are living in University Village in Thousand Oaks.
Oh.
And he's still writing. He wrote A Corporate War, Poison Pills and Golden Parachutes, a business thriller, because he had a very, very successful corporate career.
Now, just to let the audience know, you read all these books.
Yes.
I just want to give you credit for that because when you say 1,000-page
I read that book.
You read them, and do you read them? I assume you read them before the interview, or?
Yes. Let me tell you, our authors are more than just book authors. They're people who've written songs, written words, written screenplays, written documentaries. His book was so memorable, and he's so prolific now. A Way Station, Gurs, G-U-R-S. It's a way station to Auschwitz. Prelude to the Final Solution. So that no one will ever forget, thanks to Werner Frank, not only just the Holocaust, but genocides from other countries and other groups as well.
So Drew Fellman.
Drew
Turning
Fellman.
to Drew Fellman.
Here's
Who
another.
was Drew Fellman?
Drew Fellman was a local kid makes good. Went to Calabasas High, graduated in the 80s, and was quite unusual, quite creative, dressed with hats. I mean, he just looked like he was going to be successful in something creative, and was. He wrote a documentary called Born to be Wild. So you want to tell us how this all evolved?
Well, it evolved very gradually over, the last 20 years, and this film was actually really the first time that in my life all the sort of random things I've been doing for the last 20 years coalesced into one project. Because since I left high school, I've been doing a mix of journalism and film production and screenwriting and lots of travel, and all these sorts of things really came together for this film.
Tell me about the two women who are responsible for the orphanages.
Sure. Well, one of them is Dr. Birute Galdikas, and she's a primatologist who got her PhD at UCLA in the 70s, and she studies orangutans in Borneo, and she's been there, working there since 1971. She got her start as a protege of Louis Leakey.
It was an IMAX production. It played at the AMC. He also generously, along with my son, presented it here
I remember
to an audience of 200 people. The documentary and what went into it, and the camera work was magnificent. And Drew has gone on to writing a book on lemurs, Island of Lemurs. And he was in Madagascar to do that. And when I called him, he said he had great success with that as well. His works have also appeared in the Natural History Museum in New York. He's currently still working on these things, working on a new IMAX film in China. And this is about an effort to introduce captive-born panda cubs into the wild. So that will be forthcoming, and hopefully I will have him there at this time too.
I have a couple questions for you.
Yes?
Since you're uniquely positioned to make these kinds of judgments and assessments,
I
what
love
would
to
you
make
say are the key characteristics that make for a successful author, and how would you define success in terms of an author?
Fulfillment. We all have a story to tell. We all have a life that if people knew how we grew up or what our life was or is today, most of us would have people say to us, how come you didn't write a book? Or have you written a book or a story? And most things are based upon our own experiences. So the first success is to have the wherewithal, the tenacity, the passion to put pen to paper and get that book written. And the second sometimes is luck, getting it published. But nowadays, there's the opportunity to self-publish.
Yes.
And to get a lot of feedback and viewership and readership through the internet.
Well, for those people out there who've contemplated taking the plunge and writing their first book without really knowing how they'll be received, what kind of advice might you give them?
To try and get a publisher first. Get it edited. No, get it edited. So many books, like so many movies, I say, these people are editing it themselves. We all think that each word we've written
It's so golden
is
that
so
no one can touch
golden,
it.
You can't leave it out. Or everything we say, how come you left it out?
I like putting it aside and looking at it a few weeks later, and sometimes you get a whole different perspective of what you've written.
Well, you, as an author, you've written two things for us. You've written the book that the booklet, the small booklet. No, it's a large booklet, but not as fat as your second book.
Yeah, the Citizen's
which is
Guide to
for our
Calabasas.
25th anniversary.
And then that one, the 25th anniversary booklet, and my forthcoming book.
Wait, we haven't gone into the book, the book, what you
hardcover.
wrote with a member of the
That was
Historical
mostly Kim
Society, Kim
Castellan.
Castellan. And now you say you're on a third book?
Well, there's a book about the backstory of the city council and the city government, the inner workings of city government in Calabasas, stories,
The
legends
secret
that people have
stories.
not heard.
Are you sure that
Hopefully, I won't be
people...
run out of town when I write it, when I publish it.
Well, that's why I won't contribute. I'm afraid that, I will be run out of town.
Well, let's get back to your authors. That
No,
you've-
let me get back to what you said. You said set it aside. The more you read something, the more you fall in love with your own words. But if you set it aside, you get a fresh take on it the next time you look at it.
I sometimes redo the whole thing.
Really?
I mean, a whole chapter. If you look at it within a perspective of the other chapters, sometimes it changes. Sometimes the focus of the book changes.
But what did it take for you?
You know what it takes is a deadline.
A deadline.
I think that's an important thing for any author, is to have a hard deadline, because if you don't, you can let the project sit like everyone has their projects they're working on that they never finish. If you don't have a deadline, or you don't have someone on you to get the thing done, it may not get done.
I would have never thought that. I would have thought people we have all forever. How about being able to handle rejection?
Well, that's where self-publishing comes in. You know, you can self-publish and not get rejected.
But you have to learn to take rejection. I've said so many things out that come back to me that sometimes you just have to start again. Or another thing that people have to learn is to take people seeing you and hearing what you have to say and the repercussions. Case in point, when I wrote that article for the health column for the LA Times.
I remember that.
And they called me up and they said, if you're still willing to put it out, we'll publish it, Karyn.
It was a good article.
But the point is, I would not discuss this one-on-one. But
1 to 10 million was
that's
okay.
different, because you didn't have to discuss it. It was out there. And you had to say to yourself, these people know that you had this health issue, or that you have this health issue.
I forget the name of it.
It was living with body dysmorphia. And you could tell who read it because the way they look at you the next time you saw them. And you say to yourself, well, that's what you chance when you put your words out there.
Karyn, what about Dr. Milton Chu?
He is an ophthalmologist. Your first book was
Capri Ripples.
Capri Ripples. You must have really loved Capri.
I did, actually. I was there for a few days with my girlfriend, and we had a wonderful time. And then something really unexpected and kind of something like a little foolishness can lead to something really dramatic. And it was the last day we were on the island, and we were trying to pack in as much as we could. Of course, you can never see everything, you know. We decided in the afternoon, or I decided, we should rent a little boat and take a tour around the island.
When we interviewed him, all I knew is that he was working on his writing and he was doing the ophthalmology surgeries, but he was also working on an invention. When I called him to tell him I was including his name, he said that his invention was developed and approved by the FDA. It's a cataract lens invention.
Oh.
He's hoping and looking for ways that a company will adopt the technology designed for intraocular lenses, the lenses which are implanted during cataract and other vision-correcting surgeries. This takes advantage of a unique microdot system. You can tell this is another language to me. Advantage of a unique microdot system, and his microdots are the first of their kind to be FDA approved as non-toxic and safe for use during surgery. Now, I just had cataract surgery myself, and I wish that I had known about this before I went. I would have asked for those lenses to be implanted if they were available. And so for people who say, well, you've got to be just an author and do just that, no. You find that the authors I've interviewed are more than just a one topic, one profession talent. They're multi-talented, multifaceted, and multi-successful.
One of the authors that you had on your show was actually an artist known for his photography of the local area, some of the most beautiful pictures that have been taken of the area, and a local Calabasas resident, Tom Gamache.
Tom Gamache's book was his photography, his pictures, and Matthew Jaffe's words. Their book was Range on the Edge.
I can relate to virtually every inch of the mountains. I mean, I've hiked every trail, I've photographed almost every single vantage point, every panorama, every detail. There was a time when I spent 5 years doing nothing but wildflowers, down on my hands and knees learning. What do you do? How do you get this thing to light up, to jump out of the film? We're in a state of education paralysis. In other words, people are less inclined to learn. The average person is less inclined to strike out on their own and learn.
It was a tribute, an ode to the Santa Monica Mountains. And I bought that book as a gift for my husband and for other people. It's a treasure to have and a history of the area in which we live.
And in fact, Tom's pictures have been used by the city numerous times in various forms. We did a calendar with his pictures one year.
His soul is here in Calabasas. When he speaks about Calabasas and to the people of Calabasas, it's with reverence. He loves this area.
Yes.
It's not just a place that he has a house. He knows the area. He just respects the area and gives consideration to every animal, every season, every plant, and is a beautiful person.
Now, another type of artist is a musician and a composer. And one of my favorite Calabasas residents, former Calabasas residents, Doug Goodwin, who wrote the Calabasas song, our official song.
I've been a songwriter since I was just a little boy.
Really?
Yeah. Well,
I
took piano lessons very young in kindergarten, and all the way through loved piano, loved playing, and experimenting with sounds. And I wrote songs, and I started writing songs when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, and always wanted to be a songwriter. And finally, when I got married, my wife and I, Joyce, and I moved out to California.
From where?
From Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh.
We're from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, both of us. And we came out here when we got married.
Practically, the moment we became a city, he called me up, he was a neighbor, and said, I've got a song. Well, I knew he had a song. He was a professional songwriter, very, very successful. Very successful. A retired songwriter. I had seen his songs around. I knew he was one of the local celebrities in our community. I said, what kind of a song? He says, oh, I wrote a song for you to give to the city. It's about Calabasas. And quite good. And you featured him
For our 25th anniversary. His songs are like uplifting jingles, and they're very good.
He is a very uplifting person. And when I spoke to him again and said, hey, I'm going to bring up your name, he says, thank you. Called me back shortly thereafter, says, I got another one for you. It's a patriotic song.
And I heard that. You provided me with a copy. It's very, very well done.
He said, we need it. The country needs a happy song about our country. And come pick it up. I've got it for the city.
Now, I'm going to conclude by asking you, if someone's published a book and wants to appear on your show, what would they have to do?
Call me, 818-222-8888. That's 222-8888. Or, if you forget that number, call the city. And the Media Operations Department always gets in touch with me. Or, if you want to meet with me, I'll be happy to meet with you. I need to have what you have written, be it a book of poetry, a song, a movie, screenwrites, a comic book, anything. It should be published. Any topic is considered. Feel-good book to a medical journal. I know doctors have written lots of papers and lots of things that have gone down to make medical history and to improve the medicine that we practice today. And I'm open to anything. If something is extremely controversial, while it is still considered, if it is could engender some bad feelings, I would also want to have the opportunity to get an opposing point of view on the same program.
Right, that's good.
In fairness. And the person should live in the general area. We've gone beyond just the borders of Calabasas, Los Angeles County, Orange County, Ventura County, Santa Barbara County.
But a lot of those people have written about local things.
Absolutely.
So
and
it's
it
not
doesn't
just
have to
where they
take
live.
place here. It's always nice when it does.
Yeah.
And I'm in touch with other libraries who've been very generous to me with authors. I want to thank the Platt Street Library. They invite me to their authors' night, and I meet their authors. And to the authors that have been so generous throughout the years in suggesting that their friends give us a call, write to me. I'm also available by email, karynfoley@hotmail.com. And I get back to everybody. Sometimes once a year I feel very apologetic that we haven't gotten around to them yet, because I try to do first come, first serve, if it's at all humanly possible, and vary the programming a bit. I will stay in touch, and not to give up hope, and that I welcome everybody's input, everybody's words, everybody's talent, because I have such respect for having the tenacity to make sure that your words get heard.
Well, Karyn, as always, it's been a pleasure doing a show with you. Thank you very much for sticking with this project and 100 times, and we'll have to do this again for 200.
Well, yes, I will try and keep in touch one way or the other for the next 100 years or so, or the next 100 interviews. But I'll leave you with words, since I told you that to me, reading is more than just books. It can be a song lyric, it can be a poem, it can be a movie. Coming from a great philosopher from the Harry Potter series, one of the characters known as Albus Dumbledore. Are you familiar?
I'm not that familiar with that series.
Ah, yes. Words are a most inexhaustible source of magic. And to me, this author's night has been a magic to all of us, because it brings the thoughts to everyone. We've learned so much, met so many new people through their works, and look forward to meeting many more people for the next 100. So thank you, James, for joining us. And thank you again, the City of Calabasas, our library, the Friends of the Library, and most of all, our viewership and our authors for having made our program, and it's our program, such a success.